Today we're having the very exciting lecture about classification. Now I'm going to try to do this very quickly, so you might have to pause every once in a while because I'm talking too fast for you to take notes. There's also the textbook can back up your notes as well. And I also want to apologize because it's one of those ice days and I didn't feel like putting up my green screen at home. So you get my background. So first of all, I want to talk about Linnaeus classification. This is Carolus Linnaeus. Linnaeus is what we consider the father of classification or taxonomy. Taxonomy is just basically naming things, and he started it off way, way back in like the 1700s or something like that, with just simple things like if it moves, it's an animal. If it sits still, it's a plant. And then from then we have developed a whole system. So the Linnaeus or Linnaean, we often call it, classification system. So Linnaeus developed this naming system. We still use it today, and taxonomy is basically talking about the science of naming and classifying organisms. So I want you to notice right here that there is there's a little, I'm going to turn my pointer. There's a little name here for this oak. It's called Quercus alba, and I want you to notice this alba, which means white, and basically this means white oak, I guess. Anyway, so we're going to revisit this alba in a second. So a taxon is a group of organisms that in a classification system, so when we call them like a taxon, that's what we're referring to. It's just like a grouping of organisms. And then the science that we use to name it, the system we use to name it, we call it binomial nomenclature, which if you break it apart literally means to name, naming system. And so we get our scientific names. Most of our scientific names have two words. Some have three, but most have two. So we use Latin, kind of a dead language, but the language of science. And so it's kind of like it doesn't give one particular country like the benefit or the expertise. It's all Latin. We always write them in italics if you are typing them, or if you're handwriting them, you can underline it. But that is a rule. So this is how you write a scientific name. Use Latin words and write them in italics or underline it if you're handwriting. And then the two parts are the genus and species of the organism. So in the last one, we had Quercus would have been the genus and species would have been alba. Okay. So notice how genus is capitalized and species is lowercase. That is how that works. Okay. So a genus is one or more physically similar species. So many organisms can be in one genus, but for us, our scientific name is Homo sapien, and we don't have any other organisms in our genus Homo. There was like Homo erectus was a caveman, but we don't have those anymore. And so it's just us. We're in a lonely genus. But other organisms have other things in their genuses. So they'd be very closely related. And then the genus name is always capitalized. And then the species descriptor is the second part, and it's always lowercase, and it follows the genus. It's never alone. So basically, when you get here, see, here's alba again. So this means white. And then this is Tito, which is the classification that goes with owls. So this does not. So this means this organism, this is little barn owl, he would be most closely related to other owls, not to the oak tree, which has the same species indicator. It's the genus is about as far as we can go when it comes to relationships. So there may be other things that have the species indicator of sapien out there, but none other for Homo. So that means that we don't have any very close relatives in classification. Okay, so why do we even use scientific names instead of like common names? Because some of them are really hard, like Armadildium vulgare, vulgar armadillo, is a roly-poly or a pill bug or a sow bug or a potato bug. See all those common names? So it would get to where scientists couldn't share data very easily because they would not be able to know what organism they were talking about because they have different names for them. And so they ended up saying, okay, fine, you can call it whatever you want in your language or your area, but we're going to use the Latin name so that we can share data together. So like one of my favorite is the puma concolor, or mountain lion, cougar, puma, mountain screamer. I mean, you hear so many names for that one. Okay. So our classification system goes like this. Now there's one missing here. We have a domain at the top. So we're missing domain. So a domain would be like based on cell type a lot. So like we're in domain eukarya because we're eukaryotes. So all eukaryotes would be in domain eukarya. So we should have a big fat domain eukarya right up here at the top. And then kingdom Animalia, well, that divides that domain eukarya into 4 groups: animals, plants, fungus, and protists. So once you divide it into kingdom Animalia, now it includes, among other things, these organisms. But of course, there are many, 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 many more animals. Now notice you have a spider and you have a coral-like thing. So along with the thing, a crayfish and clam or oyster or something, jellyfish, along with the things you think of more commonly like bears and dogs and cats and things like that. So if we want to divide Animalia up a little bit, then we would have the phylum. And the phylum would then say, okay, well, now we're going to kick out anybody who doesn't fit in this phylum because we're going to try to narrow down how related we are. And so chordata refers to a nerve cord, so like a backbone. And so that limits out everything, takes out anything that doesn't have backbone. So there go your insects or your arachnids. There go your corals. There go your jellyfish, your oysters, your crayfish. Now you're down to anything that has a backbone, okay? Oh, but we want to go even better than that or closer related than that. So we chop it out to only mammalia. So now we're just mammals. So here's a big grouping of mammals right here. We had to knock out this little alligator and this fish and the shark because they're not mammals. And the bird. We had to knock the bird out too. Okay, but we kept the bat because he's a mammal. And then carnivora is the next. So this order. So kingdom, phylum, class, order is the next one. So now we've knocked out anything that's not a carnivore. And even some things that might be carnivores, but order carnivora is a very specific set of carnivores. And then we go to family Canidae, which if you can see, we're getting down to dogs. So we knocked out the cat and the bear. And then we go to genus Canis, and you may getting closer to something you've heard of before. And then finally we get to Canis lupus, which is the very specific species. So notice genus here, Canis, those are all very closely related. That is as closely related as you can possibly get without being in the same species. And then Canis lupus at the bottom is the wolf. Okay, so that is how we do. That's how we do our classification system. So one important thing you need to note is if you know the scientific name of the species, then you can find other species that are very closely related by looking at the genus, the first word of the scientific name. And then if you don't just look at the species indicator lupus, because there may be other things that are like lupus is kind of referring to the moon. So there may be other lupus organisms out there, but they're not more closely related than its Canis brothers would be, or sisters, whatever you want to say. Okay. All right. So the Linnaean classification system, it's limited. Like it's based on mostly on like just like morphology meaning like what it looks like. And so Linnaeus doesn't account for molecular evidence, so doesn't account for DNA, but it does only look at like what they look like. And that's a big limitation. There's some things that kind of look alike that aren't related at all. Thinking of things like dolphins and sharks. I suppose they are related. They both have a backbone, but that's about as far as it goes. So that's kind of a limitation. So we tend to nowadays lean more on genetic similarities, like we've talked about in the past, but that's just kind of new. Okay. So this slide just shows you how much things have changed. Like, I mean, things have been, we've had 5 kingdoms, we have 6 kingdoms, we've had back down to 5, it's just like, so many changes because as we have new discoveries, things have to change. And that's just the nature of science. As you get a new discovery, you have to change things to make it as modern or as using the knowledge that you have as best you can. And so just because we have these groupings and these classifications right now doesn't mean they're there to stay. Okay, so our not two domains. I wanted to review this. We know this, okay, but just FYI. Eukaryotes are true nucleus, more complex, larger cells. They have organelles. Prokaryotes mean before nucleus, it's a primitive cell, very few parts, because I wanted to review that because we have these 3 domains. We have domain eukarya, which was, like I said, divided into 4. And then we have domain archaea, which is basically like ancient life, and domain bacteria. These 2 domains, bacteria and archaea, they are both prokaryotes. Okay. So Domain bacteria includes prokaryotes in the kingdom bacteria. They're classified by shape or if they need oxygen. So like Streptococcus aureus, that is a bacteria that's like strep. It's like you get strep throat. Or also you can get Staphylococcus aureus. So aureus is referring to kind of the shape of the bacteria. They're both similar shaped. Guys, there's so many bacteria out there. You have more bacteria in your mouth than there are people on this planet. Like there's so much bacteria, and most of it's not harmful at all. In fact, most of it, I mean, a lot of it we couldn't live without. So like we have a symbiotic, a life together relationship with bacteria in our gut. And if you lose your bacteria in your gut, it's really bad. Like if you take such high-powered antibiotics that it makes you not have your gut bacteria, then you like get diarrhea really bad. And so, we actually rely on our bacteria to help us stay healthy. But then also there are some that make you very sick, and that's the ones we tend to kind of hear about the most. So, but most bacteria are actually really good or just not harmful at all. They're just there. There's bacteria everywhere. Like it's almost impossible to get a sterile surface. Okay. That's one domain. They're single cellular. Let me make sure I said that. Bacteria are single cellular. There's not any multicellular bacteria. Okay. So single cellular. Archaea is, we would think it's similar to bacteria because it's prokaryote, single cell, no nucleus, all that stuff. But their chemical wall, their cell wall chemically is so different from bacteria that they're put into a completely different domain. And so that's really interesting. These are known for living in very extreme places, like halophils means salt. These phils means loving. So halophils means like salt loving, like you think like great salt lakes or plains or oceans, things like that. They live there. Thermophils means they love high temperatures or really cold temperatures. So that would be like in sulfur pools where it's super steamy and it smells kind of stinky. That's because the sulfur smell is usually a gas product that's put off instead of carbon dioxide. They breathe out sulfur, and so you're smelling those archaea that live in the water there. So they like that high temperature and some really strange environments. They actually become the base of the food chain, way down in the ocean floor where there's no light. And there's just like gases venting out of the ocean floor. Then some of these guys can live there because they can use that instead of light to make energy, and then other things eat them. And then there's a whole like world down in the bottom of the ocean. So that's bacteria and archaea. Okay, let's get into the eukaryotes. I'm going to try to buzz through this very quickly. This talk can get really long. So domain eukaryote includes all the eukaryotes, so that you're talking about the whole domain. So anything that has a nucleus, like a true nucleus with organelles and all that stuff is domain eukarya. Now we're just going to start with protista, which I call, this is kingdom protists. Kingdom protista is the protists. And this is I call it the junk drawer of I guess of biology, but really of the eukaryotes. It's a junk drawer because if we're not exactly sure where it goes in here. So it's very diverse group. You can have anything from huge to single cell to doing photosynthesis to not to whatever. So they are eukaryotes. They have that in common. Heterotrophs, meaning they have to get their food from another source, and autotrophs are included in here. So we have some that do photosynthesis. So like these kelp here do photosynthesis. There's quite a few things that do photosynthesis in here in this kingdom. Heterotrophs, of course, mean they have to engulf other things. So there's some of those. Single cell and multicellular. So sometimes you can get like this little amoeba down here. He's just a single cellular, this little protozoan. I don't remember what it's called. Dinoflagellate, maybe. This is diatoms, which make up like diatomaceous earth. They look like bits of glass and rock and stuff, but they're living organisms. Those are single cellular. Some of the diatoms are multi. And then this kelp, of course, is huge. These things are massively tall. They can be like, 40 feet tall. And they float in the ocean, or they're anchored to the floor of the ocean, and they just sort of float up there. Huge. So they can be, both of those, all of these are considered protists. So you can see kind of how diverse it is. They can be mobile, where they just sit still all their lives. They can be stationary, where they can swim around. Very diverse. Kingdom Plantae is the next one up. So I'm going in order of kind of relationship. So protists are very distant from Kingdom Animalia, and then Plantae would be next. These are autotrophs. So they make means they automatically self. Trough, think like trough is feeder. So these are self-feeders. So they make energy from the sun. They are stationary. They don't move. They are multicellular. They are definitely more than one cell. Orchid, oak tree, corpse flower. Corpse flower smells like death, and it lures flies for pollinators. Okay. Domain eukarya. Oh, we're still in domain eukarya. All the eukaryotes. So now we have kingdom fungi. And so kingdom fungi is your almost said marshmallows, your mushrooms, your mold, and your yeasts. Okay, so those are your examples: mushroom, mold, and yeast. These are heterotrophs. They cannot make their own food, and they're stationary, which seems like a terrible combination. Can't make your own food, but you also can't move. They can be single cellular. Most of them are multicellular. You'll see these growing in rings, like a little fairy ring. So some of our pathogenic or our disease-causing fungus are like athlete's foot or ringworm or yeast infections, thrush in baby's mouth. I heard their little mouths that get all like white in there. But basically you can see them like grow in a ring, like ringworm. If you've ever had ringworm, it's just like, sometimes people get it from cats, but it's a little fungus that grows in a circle, and a lot of fungus grows in a circle. So like you can see like a fairy ring, like toadstools growing in a circle. That's because, well, one of the reasons is because a spore, like its little seed, can land in the middle, and then it sends out these runners, and then it puts up little fruiting bodies, we call them. Those are their reproductive structures, those mushrooms, all around in a circle. And so that way it can get more food because it can't move. So it spreads like over a larger surface to get, and they usually decompose stuff. So stuff that's laying dead on the ground, they'll decompose it. So that's they're kind of cool. All right, so kingdom Animalia is the final one. They're heterotrophs. We cannot make our own food. We are mobile for sure, at least in some stage of our lives. Now, corals are stationary as adults. Sponges are stationary as an adult phase, but they have a free swimming larval stage. Multicellular, yeah, there aren't any single cellular animals, but basically, these are just animals. So anything from sponges to corals to worms to insects, and then you get up into kind of the bigger stuff, like you get into your birds and stuff like that. Birds, fish, sharks are kind of a different category. And then up into mammals and reptiles, amphibians. Those are all animals. Okay. So that goes through our classification talk. Now, the whole reason we do this is because we just talked about speciation and how things can make a new species. And so then these are just kind of how do we classify those species when we find a new species. And we have very specific rules and naming ways to name them so that we can work together as scientists to compile like a body of research with them. So anyway, make sure you memorize. Oh, how do I remember the order of, I didn't tell you. How do I remember the order of this little thing right here? So I add my domain at the top, which I need to fix the picture so it has domain at the top. And then it's domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Well, that's a mouthful. So sometimes I just say dumb kids play chase on freeway get squished. Whatever, you can come up with your own, but dumb kids play chase on freeway get squished. And the further down they go together, like Canidae, like these animals are more closely related than like this dolphin would be to them, because even though they're in the same class Mammalia right here, well, these are even closer related. Okay. So that's kind of how you use that classification system to determine relationships. And now we're moving things a little bit based on their DNA, but pretty much we still will probably always have this naming system so that we can talk about them. All right. I hope that's very helpful, and I hope that you have a great day. I will see you soon.